ladies and gentlemen, success is not an accident. It is a decision, a divine decision, backed by divine principles. There is a way the world builds wealth, and then there's a way God builds wealth. And if you do it God's way, you don't just get riches, you get riches with no sorrow added. That's the kind of wealth that doesn't rob your peace, doesn't break your marriage, doesn't steal your purpose. It multiplies everything good in your life. Today, I want to walk you through how a Bible-believing millionaire built wealth, not by chasing money, but by chasing divine alignment. Because when you get into alignment, acceleration becomes inevitable. Before wealth showed up in his life, he understood something far more valuable, his assignment. You see, building wealth God's way doesn't start with a strategy. It starts with clarity of purpose. When a man understands why he's here, what problem he's born to solve, and who he's called to serve, money becomes a byproduct, not the pursuit. Many people chase money and still end up broke, tired, and empty. But when a person locks in on their God-given assignment, resources start flowing in alignment with that mission. That's the divine order. Purpose first, provision second. Understanding the assignment means asking better questions. Not how can I get rich, but what impact was I born to make? Not how do I make more money, but who is waiting on me to walk in obedience so their life can be changed? A Bible millionaire doesn't view himself as a boss just making transactions. He sees himself as a vessel, an instrument through which God's ideas, solutions, and blessings flow into the earth. This mindset shift rewires everything. It changes how he sets goals, how he builds systems, and even how he responds to obstacles, because when you know your assignment, you don't quit when it gets tough. You stay planted because you know your purpose has a harvest date. Here's a powerful example. A man once worked a simple job in customer service. He didn't make much, and he felt stuck. One day, he prayed and asked God not for a raise, but for revelation. He stopped asking for a better income and started asking for his divine assignment. Through prayer and study, he realized he had a gift for communicating complex ideas in simple ways, especially helping small businesses clarify their message. That was his assignment, to help others succeed by sharpening their voice. He leaned into that gift, built a small coaching program around it, and started teaching local entrepreneurs. It didn't explode overnight, but because he stayed faithful to the assignment, doors began to open. Within 2 years, he had built a 7-figure consulting firm, not because he chased money, but because he obeyed purpose. This principle is timeless. When you get into your assignment, your income aligns with your impact. Too many people try to force their way into industries or businesses that look lucrative but are completely disconnected from who they are. And that's why the grind feels heavy and the results remain small. But when you operate inside your assignment, grace makes things flow. The favor that follows obedience will take you further than any hustle ever could. The key is to seek clarity, not just opportunity. The moment you understand your assignment, everything else gains direction. Your vision becomes sharper, your actions become bolder, and your results become supernatural. Because when God is the architect of your assignment, he also becomes the provider of your advancement. He practiced radical stewardship because he understood that wealth isn't just about how much you make, it's about how faithfully you manage what you already have. In God's economy, stewardship is not optional, it's the foundation. Radical stewardship means treating every dollar, every opportunity, and every resource as if it belongs to God, because it does. This mindset shifts a person from being an owner to being a manager. And when you start managing with God's perspective, you start unlocking God's increase. This kind of stewardship begins with the tithe, not because God needs money, but because it aligns your heart with trust. The Bible says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. A Bible millionaire doesn't tithe out of obligation, he tithes out of honor. But it doesn't stop there. Radical stewardship also means budgeting wisely, investing intentionally, and sowing generously. It's understanding that every seed has a harvest in it, but only when it's planted with purpose. He didn't waste money on things that didn't serve his mission. He didn't try to impress people with flash. He was more focused on building a foundation that would last. He set aside money to grow his knowledge, upgrade his skills, and invest in scalable assets instead of liabilities. He was generous, but he wasn't reckless. He gave where it made eternal impact and spent with discernment, not desperation. Stewardship meant excellence in every area. How he handled time, how he managed relationships, how he nurtured his business. He didn't let money sit idle. He put it to work. Here's a perfect example. There was a man who earned $40,000, 0 cents a year, and felt he could never get ahead. But instead of complaining, he took radical responsibility. He used the savings to take a night course in digital marketing. After learning those skills, he started freelancing on the side, offering services to local businesses. Within 2 years, his freelance work outpaced his job. He transitioned into full-time entrepreneurship and eventually built a 6-figure agency. Nothing about his beginning screamed millionaire, but his radical stewardship made him one. The difference wasn't a raise, it was responsibility. He didn't wait to be blessed to be faithful. He was faithful and the blessing followed. That's the principle of the kingdom. He who is faithful with little will be made ruler over much. Radical stewardship isn't about restriction, it's about multiplication. When you handle what you have with integrity, wisdom, and purpose, God can trust you with more, because wealth without stewardship is a recipe for ruin. But stewardship without wealth still prepares you for overflow. That's how Bible millionaires think. They don't just build income, they build character. And that character invites increase. He spoke wealth before he saw it because he understood the creative power of words. Long before the money came, before the business took off, before the results were visible, he was already speaking abundance, favor, and increase. Not because he was pretending, but because he was aligning his mouth with his mission. In the kingdom, speech is not just communication, it's creation. The Bible teaches that life and death are in the power of the tongue. So he chose to speak life over his finances, over his future, and over his identity, even when his surroundings contradicted it. Speaking wealth is not about positive thinking, it's about faith-filled speaking. He wasn't just hoping to become successful, he was declaring it with authority. He spoke as someone who believed that his words had assignments. Instead of saying, I can't afford this, he said, how can I create the value to afford this? He said, how can I create the value to afford this? Instead of saying, I'm broke. He said, I'm in a temporary season of preparation for permanent provision. He understood that you can't speak lack and expect abundance to show up. Your mouth must match your mission. His words began to reprogram his thinking. The more he spoke increase, the more his mind searched for opportunities. The more he declared his vision, the more doors started opening. Speaking, wealth shifted his identity from someone who struggled to someone who expected supernatural results. And eventually, his environment had no choice but to align with the words he consistently released in faith. A powerful example of this is a woman who launched a coaching business with no clients, no marketing team, and almost no money. She worked out of a small apartment using a borrowed laptop, but every day she would speak affirmations of abundance. She declared, "I attract high-value clients who are ready to pay for transformation." She spoke as if the clients were already knocking on her door. She affirmed, "My voice is valuable, my message is needed, and my business is growing." At first, nothing changed externally, but internally, her confidence soared. She showed up differently, more bold, more focused, more prepared. Within a few weeks, she booked her first client, then another, then a referral. A year later, she had a six-figure business built not just through action, but through declaration. The truth is, if you want to see wealth in your life, you must first allow it in your language. You can't afford to partner with fear, doubt, or small thinking. Every time you speak, you are either building or breaking. He knew that. That's why he guarded his words with discipline and intention. He declared what he didn't yet see until it showed up. Because in the kingdom, you speak it before you see it. And when your confession stays consistent, your circumstances eventually obey. That's how wealth works when you do it God's way. It doesn't just start in your hands, it starts in your mouth. He solved problems, not just sold products, because he understood that true wealth is created by meeting real needs. Anyone can sell something, but not everyone can solve something. Products without purpose are just transactions, but solutions create transformation, and transformation attracts trust, loyalty, and exponential income. This principle is why Bible-based millionaires don't chase the latest trends or gimmicks. They study people. They listen for pain points. They go deep into the lives of their audience and ask, what's broken here that I've been anointed to fix? Selling a product might make a profit, but solving a problem builds a platform. It creates a long-term business rooted in value, not hype. When you become known for solutions, people seek you out instead of you chasing them. That's the difference between hustling for sales and attracting opportunities. He didn't just market what he had, he positioned himself as the answer to someone's frustration. That shift changed everything. Solving problems also forced him to elevate his skill set. He couldn't afford to be average in a world full of noise. He had to become exceptional at delivering results. So he read, studied, trained, and tested until his solution stood out in the marketplace. He understood that people don't pay for effort, they pay for outcome. And the bigger the problem you solve, the greater the value you command. This mindset caused him to approach business like ministry. It wasn't just about money, it was about making someone's life measurably better. A powerful example of this principle in action is a young man who started out trying to sell meal prep containers online. Sales were slow and competition was high. One day he sat down and thought, what actual problem am I solving? He realized people weren't just looking for containers, they were frustrated with maintaining a healthy diet on a tight schedule. That insight changed everything. Instead of just selling containers, he created a full, healthy living starter kit that included meal prep plans, grocery lists, simple recipes, and access to a community for accountability. He turned his product into a solution. Within months, his business took off. Why? Because he wasn't just offering plastic boxes, he was solving the pain of chaotic eating and unhealthy habits. That's the power of solving a problem. It builds relationship, it creates impact, it makes your business unforgettable. When you focus on being a solution, your marketing becomes easier, your message becomes clearer, and your customers become raving fans. He knew that if he could solve real problems, money would never be a problem. This is how wealth is built God's way, through service, not selfishness. By asking, how can I help, instead of how can I sell, he shifted from making noise in the marketplace to making a difference. And when you make a difference consistently, income and influence follow naturally. because the world will always pay, and pay well, for someone who can solve what they can't fix. He operated in multiplication, not just addition, because he understood that God's economy is rooted in increase, not maintenance. Addition is linear. It adds one step at a time. Multiplication is exponential. It takes what you have and makes it grow beyond what you could produce on your own. While others were content with simply earning more, he focused on scaling, leveraging, and reproducing results. He wasn't just thinking about what he could gain, he was thinking about what he could multiply: his time, his impact, his income, his influence. All were seen as seeds designed for multiplication. Operating in multiplication requires a shift in mindset. Most people think small because they only plan based on what they can do by themselves. But he understood that multiplication comes when you build systems, develop people, and invest resources into scalable models. Instead of trading time for money, he created value that could generate income whether he was present or not. He developed online courses, automated processes, trained leaders, and built structures that could grow with or without his direct involvement. His goal wasn't just to make a living, it was to create legacy. Multiplication also demanded that he stop doing everything alone. He began delegating, outsourcing, and partnering with others who had strengths he lacked. He built teams, not tasks. He looked for people who could carry the vision forward while he focused on expanding it. This wasn't just about business. It was about obeying the biblical principle that says one can chase 1,000, but two can put 10,000 to flight. He wasn't afraid to share the work because he knew shared vision multiplies results. A perfect example of this principle is a woman who started out tutoring high school students in math. She was excellent at what she did, and parents loved her. But there were only so many hours in her week. She realized that addition would mean charging more or working longer, but multiplication would mean building a system. So she created a curriculum, trained a few other tutors to teach it, and launched a small online academy. Within a year, she was no longer just a tutor, she was the founder of a growing educational business. She multiplied her method, her reach, and her revenue, all by shifting from personal effort to scalable impact. That's the essence of multiplication. Take what you've mastered and reproduce it through people, systems, and strategy. He didn't wait to get wealthy to multiply. He multiplied his mindset first. He stopped thinking like an employee and started thinking like a builder. And as he multiplied what he had, God multiplied what he gave. When you operate in multiplication, your results compound, your income scales, your time expands, and your legacy lives beyond you. That's what happens when you stop thinking in terms of what you can add and start thinking in terms of what you can release. Because in the kingdom, obedience multiplies, vision multiplies. So he made a decision: protect the environment at all costs. Guarding his environment didn't mean being arrogant or cutting people off without reason. It meant being intentional about what voices he allowed in, what energy he allowed around him, and what conversations he entertained. He knew that doubt is contagious, fear is contagious, and small thinking spreads like a virus. So he refused to surround himself with people who constantly complained, gossiped, or lived like victims. He wasn't judging them, he was just protecting what God was building in him. He curated his space with precision. His inner circle was full of visionaries, doers, and faith-driven thinkers who challenged him to grow. He listened to voices that called him higher. He followed mentors who lived what they taught. He read books, attended events, and joined mastermind groups that expanded his thinking. Every part of his environment was designed to nurture excellence, not comfort mediocrity. And as a result, his mindset stayed sharp, his energy stayed focused, and his progress stayed consistent. This principle played out powerfully in the life of a man who once lived in a neighborhood surrounded by negativity. Every day, he heard people talk about how hard life was, how the system was rigged, and how success was for other people. For a while, he believed it. Then one day, he realized that if he stayed in that environment mentally, even if he couldn't move physically, he'd never become who he was meant to be. So he started building a new environment with what he had. He turned off toxic music and turned on podcasts from business leaders. He replaced gossip with growth content. He began meeting weekly online with a group of entrepreneurs who spoke faith, strategy, and accountability into each other. He didn't wait for the environment to change. He changed what he allowed into his space. Within a year, his entire outlook shifted. He launched his first digital product, started earning income online, and eventually moved into a space that matched his new mindset. All because he guarded his environment. This is what high-level thinkers do. They don't leave their environment to chance. They build it on purpose. They don't tolerate distractions. They eliminate them because they know the soil determines the strength of the seed. He didn't just protect his peace. He protected his potential. And in doing so, he gave himself room to grow into the fullness of his calling. Guarding your environment isn't selfish, it's stewardship. And when you take your atmosphere seriously, success becomes not just possible, but inevitable. He aligned with God's timing because he understood that success achieved too early can become a burden instead of a blessing. Timing in the kingdom is not about delay. It's about preparation. God's timing is perfect, not because it's fast, but because it produces fruit that lasts. He knew that just because an opportunity looked good didn't mean it was God. He refused to be rushed by culture, pressure, or comparison. Instead, he chose to move at the pace of peace. When you align with God's timing, you start to trust that every season has a purpose. You stop trying to force doors open and begin preparing for the doors that God will open. He spent his waiting seasons sharpening his skills, deepening his faith, and becoming the kind of person who could handle the level he was asking for. Most people want elevation, but few prepare for sustainability. He wasn't just praying for success, he was preparing for stewardship, because what comes from striving must be maintained by striving. But what comes from divine timing is sustained by grace. This alignment with timing gave him patience in delay and wisdom in opportunity. He didn't jump at every deal, partnership, or trend. He discerned. He sought confirmation. And sometimes when everything looked ready, he still waited, not out of fear, but out of obedience. Because he knew delay with God is not denial, it's development. He wasn't in a rush to be seen, he was focused on being ready. Because premature exposure can ruin what preparation would have preserved. One powerful example of this came from a man who had a powerful business idea, a consulting model to help struggling small businesses increase revenue. He put together the plan, got excited, and was ready to launch. But every time he tried to move forward, something would block it. A key investor backed out. A website glitch delayed his launch. His mentor told him to pause and go back through his strategy. He was frustrated. But instead of forcing it, he went back to the drawing board and prayed. Over the next few months, he refined his systems, made key improvements, and even took a business certification course he hadn't planned on. 6 months later, an opportunity came to partner with a national business network, giving him exposure he could have never accessed earlier. Had he launched prematurely, he would have missed it. The delay was divine. God wasn't punishing him, he was positioning him. That's the reward of aligning with God's timing. You don't just get what you want, you get what's best. He learned that every not yet from God was a form of protection, and every now was filled with grace. He didn't try to outpace the process, he embraced it. And because he did, his results came with peace, power, and permanence. Success isn't just about being ready. It's about moving when heaven says go. And when you move in sync with God's timing, you don't chase blessings. Blessings chase you.